Hey everyone, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Today on the show, we got Dr. Bhrett McCabe. He is a sports psychologist, an author. Can't wait for you to hear this fascinating conversation about mental health, about faith, about social media. We took this in a bunch of different directions. I'm really excited for you to hear it, and it's coming up right now on Sports Spectrum.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
And welcome to the show. I am Jason. So glad you're tuning in. Check out our website, sportspectrum.com. Has all of our content there, podcasts, articles, devotionals. You can also email me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. If you have a guest idea, jason@sportspectrum.com. And I want you to check out the website. When you go there, sportspectrum.com, click the area that says newsletter. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's how you stay in touch, really, with all that we have going on here at Sports Spectrum. Once a week, we'll email you all the articles, the devotionals, the podcasts that you may have missed. And when you sign up, you actually get a free gift, a 10-day daily devotional written by professional athletes to help you in your walk with Jesus. You can sign up, again, for free at sportspectrum.com. Click the newsletter icon, and you are in and good to go to receive Sports Spectrum Weekly and our free ebook, a 10-day daily devotional written by professional athletes. All right, Dr. Bhrett McCabe. Listen, this guy is fascinating. I really never knew who he was. I mean, other than following him on social media. He said the same thing about me. I was so glad that we connected. I saw him tweet something, and I thought, I think I want to have him on and just kind of explore his journey, because he's a former baseball player, former LSU baseball player, a member of 2 national championship teams and 3 college World Series teams. But he also earned his doctorate at LSU in clinical psychology, and now, over the past decade or so, has become a trusted resource for amateur and collegiate and professional golfers on the PGA and LPGA tours. He's also the Sports and Performance Psychologist for the University of Alabama Athletic Program, providing services to all sports, including national championship teams like the last 3 that Alabama won in football. So this is Dr. Bhrett McCabe. He's working with a lot of pretty influential people. He also has written a couple books. His latest, Break Free from Suckville, we talk about that. He hosts a podcast, The Secrets to Winning Podcast, highlighting guests across the sports and business and entrepreneur and organizational culture. But really more, this goes into, I think, the philosophy of you, which I thought was fascinating that he talked about, the dangers of social media, the importance of nuance, the importance of talking to people who believe differently, who look differently, who think differently. Man, it was just such a great conversation. I hope it encourages you. It really encouraged me, and it's coming up right now on Sports Spectrum. Take a listen to Dr. Bhrett McCabe. Dr. Bhrett McCabe, welcome to Sports Spectrum, buddy. How are you?
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here and have a little chat.
Absolutely. It'll be a good conversation. Sports, faith, sports psychologist and author. I got to start with your first name, though, because it's spelled B-H-R-E-T-T. And when I came on, I said to you, it's Bhrett, right? And you're like, yeah, I added the H. And I said, what? Let's tell that story first and get us off here on the conversation. What do you mean you added the H? How does that work?
So when I was in kindergarten, my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around quite a bit. And I was in kindergarten, and you practice writing your name, and I just started writing my name B-H-R-E-T-T, and the kindergarten teacher called my parents and said, hey, he's added this letter, and I don't know why, but he won't stop doing it. And my mom and dad were like, just let it go away. It'll go away on its own. And it didn't, and it just kind of became a different thing for me. And obviously the H is silent, but when I finished my training as a psychologist, I had to get licensed, and your license must match your birth certificate and must match your driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my social security card was B-H-R-E-T-T, and all my academic records were B-H, but my driver's license and birth certificate and marriage license were all B-R. And so I had to go down and change my name legally. And literally, the one question is, are you running from anything in the law? No. Okay, here you go. Pay your $65, get a new driver's license, and that's it. So
Wow.
anytime I have to fill out paperwork and they say, do you have an alias? I have to answer that.
Oh, that's funny. Do you ever kind of just shake your head like, what was I thinking when I was 5? BRETT would have been a lot easier.
Yeah, it's funny though, because it's looking back at it, from a marketing standpoint, it's great because it's unique. And
Yes.
it makes it's kind of a funny thing. And to me, it's just as normal as the day is long. And I think people who first see it kind of look at it kind of weird. And for a long time, people would always try to figure out where to put the H, BRH, or, like they try to force it into Rhett or something like that. But it's, it's kind of funny now.
I think it's great. I think it's a unique thing. And now it's paying off for you many years later. I need to just kind of get into this conversation with you explaining what you do, because that's what intrigued me to you in having you on this show. From the sports perspective, certainly is what you do. You're an author, of course, you host a podcast, but you also are a sports psychologist, and you work with some of the most trusted amateur, collegiate, professional golfers. You work with Alabama. I just think it's a really interesting role and unique job that you have. Can you kind of tell us about it and maybe how it really started to take shape for you?
Yeah, I was a baseball player at LSU, and I was a young guy who did a lot of things, I did everything right, but I never seemed to have some success. And I had some injuries, and I turned to the mental side after I had some injuries. And that kind of turned me on to psychology, and I switched my major and I became a clinical psychologist. And I specialized in the way that medical conditions and people coped and people handled things like that. But I always wanted to come back and work with athletes, always. And I'm not the traditional psychologist, meaning I'm not in clinical practice anymore. I used to do clinical work, but I'm really invested in the person, and I'm really invested in what I call the psychological fingerprint. What forms who you are? What are your belief systems? What do you rely on for strength? What do you believe you're capable of doing when things get tough? And so I became a psychologist because I was fascinated by people. I became a psychologist because of my own journeys. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of build maybe a hybrid approach of a job now that I never believed would have been possible ever, right? Never possible. And I had left a pharmaceutical job that I was doing for 8 years. That was a very successful kind of corporate job. And I went out on my own. I felt like I had to really invest in myself, and I did. And I'm so thankful that I did, but I also have always stayed true to what I believe is the most important. And I'm the guy who suffers from a lot of anxiety naturally in myself. And there are times that I'm leaving to go out on tour, and I've got a lot of anxiety and a pit in my stomach about being there. And, are they going to be happy? What are they going through? What do they need? And then, I remember sitting in my bedroom a couple of years ago, and I just had this anxiety. I mean, I'm getting ready to leave to go to the US Open, right? And I got this pit in my stomach, and most people would say, God, what are you doing? And I'm like, but it's such a vulnerable place to be because you're serving people and all that. And I can remember sitting there and just had this like strong, powerful voice in my head that said, just give them everything you've got and serve them.
Yeah.
And that was it. And that's what I do. And so if people say, what is your philosophy? My philosophy is always you. And I work off of people. And so whether it's the podcast, whether it's writing, Ryan Holiday, who wrote the book, Ego is the Enemy. And I had spent some time with him about 2 years ago, and we were talking about writing, and he said, write to someone. Well, I write to me, and I write as if I'm the reader. And it's somewhat memoir based, and it's somewhat talking to me and the struggles that I've been through. So my thought process is I'm just going to give it everything I got. And if people resonate with it, fine. If they don't, I understand. I'll give them other books to read from somebody else. And so I think the psychologist, I wanted to challenge myself academically to go as far as I could in my degree path. But I also wanted to have the legitimacy of what I did. So I could always say, look, I'm a licensed psychologist. I follow ethics and guidelines and things like that. I've been trained. I've been in every facet of the human continuum. But I also want to be the guy who stands in the shadows. I don't want to be in front. So I try not to capitalize on my players or people's success. because they're still people at the end of the day who are going through things just like you and me. And so just because they won a big tournament or they won national titles, or doesn't matter, they have to wake up the next morning and start again. So I think I always come back to that. Just give them everything you got and serve them for who they are. And that's what it is.
That's really smart. And I think of preachers a lot of times and pastors who preach from the pulpit, and they say a lot of times, I'm preaching this sermon or sharing this message to me. And then if it helps other people, great. And that's the idea, right? It's going to help other people, but it's really for yourself. And then you let the chips fall where they may. How does this start for you in terms of having a client, right? Like, how do you get that first client, or I don't even know if a client is the right word, but that first person that you work with, your first partnership, right? With a golfer or with a team, because now you're talking about some of the biggest names and some of the biggest people in the PGA Tour, and certainly the University of Alabama. Enough said there in terms of all the success there. How does that even start for you?
I'll have to tell you the Google story with Alabama, but it started. So when I was in grad school, I did my grad school training at LSU where I played ball, but I didn't work with the athletic department then because I wanted to be different. I didn't want to like follow the jock mentality, right? Where, you kind of get earmarked in the academic circles.
Yeah.
And so when I went on my internship, I did my psychologist do a 1-year residency, and I did mine at Brown up in Rhode Island, and I had an amazing mentor that when I showed up, he said, "Hey, I know you're a little different. I know you're not going to go the traditional route, but Providence College they're looking for somebody to help out their hockey program. Would you be interested?" And I'm like, "Well, can I do that?" And he's like, "I'm the director of training. Yes, you can do that. And I'll supervise you and all that." And so I was like, okay. And so I spent some time with them, and then I kind of put it on the back burner for a while because I didn't want to be the guy who wrote a parenting book who didn't have kids. I didn't want to have a person who, you know what I mean? Like, I'm the expert of everything and I've done nothing, but
they're doing marriage counseling and they've never been married. Yeah.
Correct. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a step back, and I don't want to teach from my experiences. I want to learn. And so I literally spent time in pharma for 8 years studying organizational effectiveness, medical strategy, and things like that. And then I was out at my golf club. I'm an avid golfer, and a guy came up and said, "Hey, can you help this young person out? I know what you've done. I know your background. Can you just answer a couple questions?" And then that led to some coffees and some breakfasts. And then that led to helping. I probably helped 20 clients without charging anything because I felt like my clinical skills were really, really rusty. I'd been 8 years since I'd done any clinical work or coaching work. And so then that led to better players and players having better success. And then I got a call one day to go to the PGA Championship to work with Graham McDowell, who had been about 18 months since his U.S. Open victory. And I'm walking down the fairway with him and a young kid by the name of Rory McIlroy, who had just won the U.S. Open. And I'm sitting there and I have a picture on my phone where I texted my wife and I said, "I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. Like, I am so over my head."
Right.
And she's like, "Well, they brought you there for a reason. So if they don't want you back, just tip your cap, but make sure you leave with no regrets." And I did. And Graham and I have had an 8-year relationship. Sometimes we work together formally. Sometimes we're just friends. He'll bounce in and bounce out, which is wonderful. Love his wife and his kids. And then that just started leading. And I thought at the time, it's funny, Graham would get better and he would refer me to other clients. It's not how it works. It's usually coaches and agents. And every once in a while, a player will say, "Hey, you need to go see Bhrett." But when I'm out on tour, it's so funny. I had there's two compliments that I love. One is Billy Horschel, who I've worked with for 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years. He's had tremendous success, top 20 in the world now. Yeah. And he said, "Bhrett, I don't know what we do when we work together, but whenever I leave working with you, I feel empowered." And I said, "That's the greatest compliment you can give me. One is that means I have job security because you have no idea what I'm doing. But second is I'm not giving you tools. I'm not giving you things that you have to do. I'm making you believe in you, because self-belief is the most powerful thing that we can go with." Yeah. And you believe in you, and I've removed some clutter. And so that was always important. And then, I think that's really important. But also, I had a player who called me and said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I heard who you work with." He said, "Have you ever been on tour?" I said, "Yeah, I've been out there for about 8 years." He's like, "How do I not know who you are?"
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I was like, that's what my dad was military. He was a C-130 navigator, 20 years, worked with special forces, worked with the Delta Force guys, moved them around. And he used to always say, medals are for what you did yesterday. Your future is defined by your actions tomorrow. And stand in the shadows, leave before the press conference starts. And that's who I am. And so those are the best compliments. But what happened was just word of mouth. I felt that content was critically important. I've watched our good friend John Gordon do stuff with great content. I've watched other guys do, and men and women do things with just great content. Content is currency to me. Yeah. Because if you put out good content, you share it, you give it to somebody else. It doesn't mean you're ever going to come see me, but you may call me 8 years later, right? I've watched your podcast. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, but I've never reached out to you.
Right.
I knew you would come my way eventually if I did something well, and I want to get better. And so, funny thing is, Alabama called. I'm living over here. I'm an LSU grad.
Yeah, I got to hear this story for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it makes for a lot of fun back home. But I'm sitting over. I'd been in practice, whatever, and I get this email from a trainer, and it was the basketball trainer, Anthony Grant, who's a wonderful human being, who's now the basketball coach at University of Dayton, who was coach of the year during COVID. And I get this text, I get this email, and it was almost like spam email. Like, it was written so fast by the trainer that it almost didn't make sense. And I was like, I don't know if this is a joke. And I emailed back and said, happy to talk. And he called and he said, we found you on Google and we need somebody to come in and work with our team. And I was like, okay. So I went over there and watched practice, and Anthony is amazing. And he goes, I don't want anybody to know who you are. It's just me and the trainer. Okay. So I watched practice and everyone's like, who is this guy? He's like, oh, he's a scout. Okay. Well, then I sit behind the bench at the next game. Nobody knows who I am. Then we go to the SEC tournament and I'm on the airplane with the team. Nobody knows who I am. I'm on the team bus. I'm at the team dinner. And finally, Anthony stands up and says, this is Bhrett. And that started a relationship with Alabama, which then led to the basketball team was very pleased with what we did. We went to the tournament and got hosed on some officiating calls from Creighton. Okay, well, whatever. And lost in the first round. And then the athletic department side called and said, hey, we need a guy to serve our non-revenue athletes. You're not going to touch football. Don't even ask. And I was like, don't care. Went to LSU. Don't care.
Right.
and I sat over there and I went over and I started working with cheerleading, tennis, things like that. And then I just came in and they were like, do not go up and walk around the football ops. And I'm like, don't worry, not going to do that. And then I started helping more and more coaches out. And then we had a young man who was a football player who was very sick. And he recently just passed away from a tragic accident that had nothing to do with mental health. But he was very ill psychologically and just suffering from severe depression. And they asked me one day, they said, hey, we need you to see this young man. You're here, see him. And that formed a relationship that earned some trust because I just was there for the kid. I had no ulterior motive. Like, I didn't want to work with football. Like, I didn't care, I've won championships. I don't need to be the guy in the locker room or on the sidelines.
Right.
And so I just devoted myself to this young man and we got him well. He ended up leaving the game, which was the right thing for him. And he lived a very healthy and prosperous life until he had a tragic accident. But that just opened the door. And then all of a sudden it was like, can you help this kicker? Can you help this? And the next thing you know, it became, and I specialize in athletes that are injured, athletes that are going through deep struggles, doubt, self-belief, things like that. And that just, I guess I just earned the trust. I've probably talked to Coach Saban twice in 10 years I've been there because I'm, he's like talking to the president. You talk to the people who talk to him and you just leave it at that. So long story. That's how I got there.
Dr. Bhrett McCabe is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. That was a great story. Just the fact that they Googled you and then it leads to all of this, right? It's kind of crazy and you just never know how God's going to work. I wonder for you, how does your faith, and we haven't gotten deep into your faith yet, but how does that faith play a role in the work you do, in, the people that you talk to? Certainly you probably have to be mindful that not everybody is a person of faith, but I'm imagining that faith is important for you in the way that you tackle your job.
Yeah, my faith has been a facet of my life ever since I was a young kid. I went to Catholic schools. I'm a Catholic. My family was always a seeker. I can remember being a young man and my I'm an only child, but my family would bring in people who had different belief sets, different backgrounds, different things, because my mom mainly was she was a learner. She wanted to be around people that were different. And so she was always, and my dad too was always, I went to Catholic high school in Baton Rouge, a very prestigious all boys school. It is just an amazing foundation for men. And our president of our school was find your relationship with your God, which meant we all have a relationship in our walk. I want to open that door and open that window for you. And it was all about that. And so we would, like my freshman year, you would do Old Testament. Sophomore year, you'd do New Testament. And then junior and senior year, you would do a combination between marriage and family and becoming a male in today's society.
Wow.
And you talk about brilliant.
This is in high school?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And that's why, Catholic High is just an amazing, amazing place. And it was all very powerful to developing the male of today, to serve your wife and kids, to, walk in your faith. The Catholic faith is very, very powerful to me. I have problems with where the Catholic Church is going, sure. And I have so that creates conflict. So I am not a mass goer because I feel like I don't understand why women can't serve as priests. I don't understand. I mean, I have some philosophical differences, but the faith itself is very powerful to me. The rosary has been a strong component of my life for a long time, which is just praying to God and through Mary and through Jesus to give me the strength to serve. And that's been a strong component of my entire life. And so faith to me is all about our personal walk. I want to read things of different. If you look at my bookshelf, I'll read things of any background. I don't try to put things into a box. I try to expand outside the box because, the first church was under a tree, and people who share is the greatest wisdom that we can ever create. Is that when we ask people of differences, what do they believe versus dictating what we think they should believe? Because there was a former teammate of mine who is a very popular Major League Baseball guy. And he came back one day and very involved in FCA as I was. And he came back and said, they put me with a family who had a different belief set. It was, and I was going to go over there and I was going to get them to see the light.
Right.
And I came home and I saw the light because by having discussions, they were Jewish, and he said, and my coach was Jewish. And he said, what I found is we have a lot more similarities than we have differences. And, that often threatens people when you say that but really what he was saying was it challenged me to believe and to think more and to search more into my answers and to search for information. And that's how I've always taken it. I've always respected whatever people believe. And I believe that spiritual coping, religious coping is a very powerful way to manage through stress. I believe very strongly when somebody's struggling to get connected with their church, their pastor, and I'll use that a lot. Like, hey, let's go to sit down and have a conversation or three. So I'm trying to pull on everything I can from a psychological standpoint. But for me, my foundation is I wake up every morning and I sit at my desk and I reflect and I think, and I'm present with what I'm doing. Doing what I do, you have to be very accepting of what other people are, very open to listen to what other people's beliefs are, but that's how you connect to them. And my ultimate goal is that people leave me at some point and go, that's a good dude. And if I ever have problems in my life, I may not call Bhrett again, but I'll call somebody like him. And I'm not going to suffer in silence. That's the ultimate. So that's kind of to answer your question, that's kind of how I take it.
No, I think it's really well said. And I think there's a lot of different ways to go with that, right? Because a lot of the people that we have on this show, we talk about God, we talk about Jesus, we talk about sports. We don't really talk about denominations or the type of church. We just talk about those things. And from a spiritual perspective, I think the more conversations we can have with people who think different, believe different, maybe even interpret things different, I think there's one non-negotiable. I would say it's God and His Son Jesus. Everything else, yes. Let's have a conversation about it.
100%.
That's my opinion, and that's my personal belief. And then let's talk to somebody who's Jewish or somebody who's Muslim or even an atheist, and just say, okay, we can get along here. And I think, unfortunately, over the last 5 years, 6 years, maybe even longer, maybe it's been on forever. We, I don't know, we just look at that person who believes different as the enemy when it shouldn't be that way.
Well, I think social media, and I think we live in a world where we don't listen. We live in a world where we project our ideals on people. And I think some of it's because we're not comfortable with our own ideals. Like we're looking for that confirmation to bounce off of.
Yeah.
When reality is, when we get into an uncomfortable spot and we have a conversation and it's just an open discussion, and I can still leave you and I disagree.
Right.
But I can still love you.
That's what's missing.
That's what's missing.
Yeah.
I put up a tweet the other day, and I'm always amazed in this world that I work in motivation, psychology and stuff. The fervor of anger and hatred that I'll get. And a lot of it's around the vaccine or stuff. I'm a pro-vax guy. I mean, let's do it. The science is good. I worked in pharma for 8 years. I was a little hesitant at first. I'm not a mandate guy. I'm not whatever. Yeah. My daughters can't take the vaccine because of some autoimmune illnesses. And I read a guy who's, a publisher and he's a writer and all this other stuff, like people who are unvaxxed, should be denied medical treatment at ICUs. And I was like, boy, what a hated perspective. Right. And he was like, and he just went off on me. And I said, my oldest daughter has Crohn's disease and has about every autoimmune condition possible. And she's had COVID and her antibodies are very high. And her physician, her immunologist have both said, you are not getting the vaccine because we have a family history of Guillain-Barré. Okay, no chance. Okay. Right. So when I look at that, I'm like, and I texted him and I said, how dare you make that comment? Because as a psychologist, I can't choose who I serve and don't serve. Somebody walks up to me and is suicidal or hurting and needs help. I can't look at them and say, yeah, don't agree with you. I'm like, what a horrendous awful perspective to have.
Yeah.
And I'm watching John go through, putting up his beliefs on vaccine mandates, and people want to turn his word unbelievably. They're not listening to what he has to say. I text them. I said, I don't have the standing you have to go out there and share my beliefs. I'd love to have a conversation with people about vaccine mandates. I just think that we should do a better job as a country encouraging people to evaluate science and make a decision.
Right.
That was part of my deal as a psychologist. That's what we did. And so I'm all good about that choice. I can respect that. And so I think when we get into an uncomfortable situation, we resort on, the dog that growls versus the dog that pays attention. We need to be the dog that pays attention and searches the room. We don't need to be uncomfortable when people have differing ideas. Doesn't mean we have to agree with them. That's what makes this world wonderful. And in our own search, in our own life, in our own search for the word, in our own search for the truth, that's where we need to be going out there. We need, we can't forget who Jesus would rather spend time with.
Yes. The sinners.
The people everybody else cast away.
That's right.
And here we are passing judgment way too often.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the Derek Carr video that got shared. And, Henry Ruggs, obviously Alabama guy, has that horrific situation happen a while ago. And Derek Carr comes on and says, listen, nobody else might love him right now, but I'm going to be that one guy that loves him. And I thought, my gosh. And and I shared it on my social media pages and saw most people were like, wow, I want a friend like that, which is the majority of people. But there were still some who were like, well, he has no empathy for the people who, Ruggs killed or whatever. And I was like, no, he actually said that too. You have to listen to the whole thing, but it's almost like,
we didn't get that part.
Right. But it's like social media wires us to kind of just automatically default to negative. And it shouldn't have to be that way. There doesn't always have to be a wrinkle or a negative connotation to something that you post. It's really just, this dude's trying to love his friend, and that's it.
And in his worst of time, and not apologize, not approving or anything of what he did. He's looking at the person who made a horrendous, tragic decisional mistake, who took the life of another. And yet, what are we supposed to do? Turn that person away? I will say this. I would love to get a coalition of people together that could get the world to understand the true danger of the use of bots on Twitter. Bots are the ultimate bullying mechanism. They are used to divide the world. 95% of the hate that comes out in what we read are bots. They're really good to separate us. If the person doesn't have a full name, and if I look on their profile and they have 50 followers and 2,000 follows, they're following 2,000 people and 500 follows. That is a bot every single time.
Yes.
And what happens is but Jack and his team at Twitter, Zuckerberg at Facebook, they use bots. One is to get people fired up to stay on their platform. But when we can prove that those bots are leading to cyberbullying and leading to poor mental health outcomes, and we're going to lose a kid because of or we can prove that these bots have led to people acting out in groups to separate. One of the guys in this world, there was a video back before the election where there was some videos of white supremacists putting up signs, and this guy went out and said, whatever. And I said, do you think any of those people could be there to incite differences versus actually expressing their belief? And he ripped me a new one. Okay. Wow. And like, Alabama's emailing me all this. I said, I don't believe you. Alabama wouldn't email me. All I did is I asked a question. Well, geez, what did we just learn at the Virginia gubernatorial election? Mm-hmm. There were actors there done to incite differences. Right. Okay, that weren't even representative of what they were trying to say. They were just there to create a storm. Okay, that's what we all need to look at. Is not there are elements in this world that are meant to divide us for their own good, for their own benefit, and we need to be bigger than that. And we need to fight to say, look, these are unacceptable, and they're hurting and killing people because. A mentally ill person can read that and say, I'm going to go right the wrong of that and take a gun into a group and blow people up because a bot got them so, radicalized. Right. It's just nothing but radicalization that we see in the Muslim world for jihadists. That's all it is. Yeah. And from a mental health standpoint, from a faith-based standpoint, I think a lot of times we're built to think like bots versus let's have a conversation.
Yeah, let's be more built to think like Jesus.
Let's break bread.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the old joke, a rabbi, a priest, a preacher walk into a bar together. That's a good day.
That's a good day. That's it.
It's a good day.
Yeah.
It's a good day. We can just sit and talk.
Dr. Bhrett McCabe is here with us on Sports Spectrum. A fascinating conversation that we're having in directions that I probably didn't think we were going to be headed to. But I think everything we just talked about kind of can stem back to athletics and to sports and to athletes. And I really want to hear your thought here on a struggle, or maybe the biggest struggle that you've encountered in working with athletes on a daily basis. You wrote this book, Breaking Free from Suckville, which I do want to ask you about, like, what is Suckville? And maybe that's part of your answer, but what do you think is the biggest struggle right now in the athletes that you've talked to and worked with?
Well, our athletes today have more stress, depression, anxiety than I've ever seen. Okay. And it's not because, yes, parents are more involved, but parents are always involved. Coaches are more demanding, but coaches have always been demanding. This generation is different, but every generation is different. Okay, take that all off. Yeah. It's because that we as people have this unrealistic expectation that we're going to reach our potential, that our potential defines our journey, and our potential defines this spot that we're going to, and that everybody's told us you can have anything you want in your life. No, I can't win the 100-meter dash in the Olympics. So I can't have everything I want. Okay. So what happens is we anchor to this ideal that if I do the hard work, if I do this, I should be able to reach this. And what happens is this is our reality. Okay. And this reality right here is pretty good. But every time we push this, our potential moves further away. But I call that space in between Suckville, because people come to me and they're frustrated, they're angry, they're down, they can't handle the stress. And they're so upset with themselves. Like they feel like they're wrong. They feel like they're struggling and they don't understand it. And when I explain it to them of your reality is so much better than it was 2 years ago. And even though you may really be struggling right now, we got to rebrand, rethink the way we're looking at things, start building from our belief in ourselves, by building our confidence, by building our trust, by developing a process and understanding that it's not about, ease. It's about working through the muck and the mud that we're in. That space doesn't define. Let's get rid of our potential. Let's be the best version of we can be today, and let's see where it takes us. Like, you don't have to be anything. right? You just have to respond to the challenge that's in front of you.
I call it bloom where you're planted. Is that a good way to put it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep,
Just be
100%.
where you are. Yeah.
And I always tell people, until we develop great fertilizer, how we fertilized was cow manure. So you got to push through a lot of crap to get to the bloom. And that's where we're at.
Well, that potential is like seeing the grass on the other side and thinking that it's greener. I want to be there. And they forget right where they are is where God wants you sometimes to do great things.
And it's amazing, right? Because when we find ourselves in comparisons, we find ourselves looking to other people, what we latch on to somebody and go, golly, they do it so good.
Yeah.
But that's usually where we're at our worst, our greatest insecurity. All right. We're at the greatest insecurity at that point. So whenever we see something else that we really latch onto as a strength, that's usually reflecting our own insecurity. So listen to it. Don't judge it. Just listen to it. Listen to it. Say, what do I need to learn? Not why do I feel this way?
Yeah, that's really well said. Who pours into Dr. Bhrett McCabe? You do a lot of pouring into others. I ask this question a lot to coaches, right? Because they're constantly giving and giving and giving. And I'm like, man, if we're going to empty our cups, we got to fill it up with something. Who fills up your cup? How do you stay filled?
I think my family more than anything else. I mean, the one thing that I will always say is that when I'm working with clients, when I see them, talk to them in person or whatever, I usually I'm pretty good at feeling what they feel. But the problem is if I see 8 or 10 people in a day, by the end of the day, I'm feeling that. So my family is very important to me. Extremely important to me. My wife's my best friend. She's my business partner. We've been together for almost 30 years. There was, just to have an opportunity to spend time with her, go to dinner with her and just talk, just to sit and watch a show and just be present with one another and not have to be anything as big. Yeah. I love to play golf. I love to get out and play golf. I wish I loved to exercise. I don't, but I love to play golf. And so I think that's kind of where I find my joy and my happiness is spending time with my kids and seeing what they do. And, I'm being an only child. I can be pretty introverted. I sometimes like to be around people. I like to have control of that. Like if I want to be with somebody, I can. If I don't have to be. Like it's not mandatory. And so in that perspective, having that ability to say, hey, I need to go to bed at like 8:00 tonight. I'm pretty whipped. And my wife will say, yeah, go ahead. See you tomorrow morning. Like there's no judgment,
Yeah. That's big.
And yeah, that's huge.
How were you able to manage the whole LSU Alabama thing when Alabama Googled you? I just thinking about this. I was going to ask it earlier, and then we went into a few different areas, and I'm thinking, man, you're an LSU guy winning championships. We didn't even talk about your baseball career, which someday maybe we'll get you back on and we'll have those conversations. But you're an LSU guy and you're working with Alabama. That's usually like mixing, what is it, oil and vinegar or something like that.
It's sometimes the things that you want the most. I had a baseball coach who told me the greatest song ever written was Garth Brooks' Unanswered Prayers, right? All I ever wanted to do was to come back and work at LSU as a psychologist. And I reached out a couple times and they kind of blew me off. And they were like, whatever. And then the baseball coach that was there just would not even respond to me. And I was like, okay. And I was frustrated. And then when Alabama called, then I was like, wait a minute, this is 35 minutes from my house, 45 minutes from my house. They are all about it. They are 100% invested in the mental health of their student athletes and their well-being. Oh, I could have been driving 6 hours once a month, but I got somebody right here that I'm a part of their family. They treat me so well. They are so committed to human development. I know people look at Coach Saban on the sidelines, but people don't understand what he's doing. The kids that he's yelling at, he knows that he can yell at because that's how they respond. You don't see him put his arm around the kids that need that right now. And so I would get a little, people would laugh. And then usually what people would say is, hey, I don't blame you. And so I wear more Alabama gear than I wear LSU gear. I still have purple and gold in my blood, but I represent Alabama every day because I know the kids, I know the people. And that's important. And now, and it's so funny, then all of a sudden who started calling? LSU. And I was like, guys, I can't do it. That's a slap in the face of the organization that trusted me. I wish you had called me before, but I'm glad you didn't because I wouldn't be where I'm at today.
Wow. Unanswered Prayers.
Yep.
I'm going to go listen to that song when we're done. Done recording here. It's a great song.
Yep. Yes, it is.
So with all that you've accomplished and everything that's taken place here. I do want to ask you about the book as well, Break Free from Suckville. You have the podcast, The Secrets to Winning podcast. Kind of what's God throwing at you right now that you're taking and kind of seeing where he might be taking you going forward? This book is a great resource. People can go get it. You've written a couple of them actually, and you have this podcast and certainly the work that you're doing. Where do you kind of see the Lord taking you, going forward here?
It's a good question. I don't know right now. I don't know. Because I have a very heavy client load of individuals, and we're in a spot right now where we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage the demand as well as the demand to speak, and my private, my professional athletes, and more people reaching out from agencies and stuff like that. So I'm not sure. We're trying to listen. We're trying to think. In fact, my wife and I have a conversation this afternoon about it, just to try to say, where is this going? I want to make sure that I'm not ever out of touch and out of reach. Right. But I also want to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, because I'm not trying to toot my horn, but I will work 90-hour weeks, and that gets to a point where it's exhausting. 7-10 days in a row type of thing. But I love what I do. I love people. So I'm trying to figure out what the right balance is. So I'm not sure where this goes. I write, like I said, because I want to write to me, and I'm writing a book right now on parenting in sports, because I feel like, but it's not going to be the traditional parenting in sports book. I think our parents are under attack and our coaches are in a crisis. So I think we got two sides that are hurting, that don't know how to communicate with one another.
Yes. Yeah. As a dad who watched his kid just finish, through 4 years of high school, play softball, play volleyball. And those aren't, your sports where maybe more is invested, like football or baseball or basketball. But there's parents that care, and there's parents that speak up, and there's parents that are frustrated, and there's parents that are mad. And then there's coaches that are putting their hands up like, I don't know what to do here. Coaches that are struggling relating to kids, coaches that are struggling relating to parents. So I just hear that, and I'm thinking, man, that's a book a lot of people need to read.
I hope so. I hope it's a book that coaches will share, parents will share, and I hope it'll bring a good foundation to help people realize that at the end of the day, parents are trusting their most valuable resources, their most valuable asset, to their coaches. And coaches' ultimate job is to develop men and women of our future. So we're all trying to do the same thing, but we just love our kids so much, sometimes we crush them on both sides. So I think we need to just, I'm hoping that this book will, to provide that answer. So
BhrettMcCabe.com is the website. He is Dr. Bhrett McCabe, sports psychologist, author, podcaster. The podcast is called The Secrets to Winning. You can download that everywhere podcasts are found. Thanks, man. Thanks for doing this. This was a conversation. I wasn't sure where it was going to go. I honestly thought it would kind of be through your journey, but I'm glad we talked about some of the topics that we talked about, and keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate all the people that you're helping, and appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much for thinking of me and having me and allowing me a platform to talk.
And many thanks to Dr. Bhrett McCabe for being here today on Sports Spectrum. That was a unique conversation for me. That went in directions that I wasn't really planning on going into. And it's not that I was agreeing or disagreeing with him on whether it was politics or vaccinations or anything like that. I just thought it was a really good conversation to talk about a bunch of different things and have this conversation with someone who maybe he sees things a little different, or maybe even believes a little differently. But as we talked about, the non-negotiables for me are God and Jesus. And once we start there, let's go and let's have a conversation. I love talking to him. I can see why athletes and others are encouraged and feel empowered when they finish talking to Bhrett, because he has a lot of great things to say, but he really uses his skills and his education and his talents and experience to help people become better people and be present in the moment, not worry about goals, not worry about, I think he called it, striving the corporate ladder and looking to what the next thing might be. We talked about blooming where you're planted and being placed right where you're at and being the best you that you can be. Lots of good stuff there. It really is. Mental health is such an important thing for so many people. And it's an important thing I would say for all of us, really, when you think about it. So I'm glad that Bhrett was willing to share a little bit of that here today on the show. We also thank you for listening as well. Again, all of our resources, the content, the free devotionals, our podcasts, everything really that's free is available at sportspectrum.com, our website. We also have our magazine, our latest issue with Monty Williams from the Phoenix Suns on the cover. You can subscribe right now for just $18 or $30 for a 1 or a 2-year subscription. The magazine makes a great gift, especially if you're thinking about 2022 and how can I encourage someone in their faith or have a great resource for them. The Sports Spectrum magazine is a great place to start. It's perfect for kids as well and a gift idea for them. You can sign up at sportspectrum.com. There's a magazine icon. You click it and you can subscribe right there to Sports Spectrum's magazine. Thanks again for tuning in to the show today. We'll see you guys next time right here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day. We love you, and please do stay safe.